It can be used to improve delivery mechanisms, for instance. Overall, AI is going to really lower the barrier so that those less sophisticated actors can potentially develop these types of weapons. So, once that was solely the province of, say, your state-run lab, can now have non-state actors trying for it. So the EO responds to this by tasking some key departments to evaluate and report on AI's capabilities in this area, aiming to both understand and mitigate these threats. This is really putting a flag in the ground and maybe trying to find out some more information later.
I'm Matt Gluck, research fellow at Lawfare, and this is the Lawfare podcast, December 6th, 2023. A little over a month ago, President Biden issued a sweeping executive order on artificial intelligence, covering a broad set of AI issues, such as privacy, transparency, the development of biological weapons, and many more. The order hands out expansive directives to several U.S. government agencies and private industry, which the Biden administration hopes will help the U.S. lead the globe in AI development in a safe and sustainable manner. I sat down with Bill Wright, Global Head of Government Affairs at Elastic, a leading search company, to discuss, from the perspective of an industry insider, what the executive order means for tech companies that rely on AI and the relationship between tech companies and the U.S. government. Is collaboration among companies in the competitive AI space possible? Which aspects of the order could help smaller companies keep up? Will the order let companies dictate their processes for complying with the order's broad objectives? It's the Lawfare podcast, December 6th, Bill Wright on the AI executive order.
To get started, could you tell us a little bit about what you do and how it relates to artificial intelligence?
Yeah, sure. So, first off, I'm head of Elastic's global government affairs, so primarily focused on public policy. I have been here with Elastic for about a little bit over a year. A little bit about Elastic before we kind of go into where we stand in around AI. We're essentially a data platform, but we're a lot more than that. So really, our core mission is to how to empower organizations to search and analyze their data in real time, no matter what scale that is. So, we've been in the game for about a decade. During that time, our team's grown to about 3,000 employees globally. We've had over 4 billion downloads of our software. We're trusted by governments around the world and by more than about half of the Fortune 500 companies. And the reason I was so excited to come to Elastic is data is exploding, especially the unstructured data, which is right in our wheelhouse. You think about all of the apps and the services in this podcast today compared to years ago, and the amount of data that is coming off of all of this. By some projections in 2025, annual data volume will be 480 exabytes per year, which means absolutely nothing to me, but I can tell you that's a lot. And to put that into perspective, all the words ever spoken by humanity amounts to about 5 exabytes. So not sure if that's helpful or not, but suffice to say that's a lot. So at Elastic, we really try to help organizations sift through that ocean of data to find the answers they need in real time and do it at massive scale. Two primary use cases, of course, are observability. So that's making sure your systems are transparent and understandable. That becomes really crucial when you're trying to figure out what's gone wrong or you're trying to fix issues efficiently. And it's a data problem at its core because all of these systems and applications are pushing out and generating data. Secondly, security. Of course, that's about protecting those systems and threats and ensuring resilience. It boils down to a data challenge where the goal is effectively detect, prevent, respond to incidents. So Elastic Security kind of harnesses both that search aspect of finding those threats and AI to take all your security data from events to threat intel and try to turn those into actionable insights.
Thanks. That's very helpful. So this conversation is going to be about the AI executive order. But before we get into the substance of the order, one question about search in particular. LLMs, large language models, seem to know pretty much everything about everything, no matter how obscure. So Elastic is a market leader in search, but will LLMs make search obsolete?
Yeah, great question to start with, Matt. So first off, I think it's key to really understand the limitations of LLMs. So these models, obviously, they're incredibly smart, but their knowledge is based on the data they've been trained on. And here's the catch. That data is generally static. It's a snapshot in time. So when the world changes, LLMs aren't always up to speed on that latest information. But here's kind of where the magic of real-time search comes in. And I'm just speaking for Elastic here. But think of search as sort of that librarian for AI. It's all about getting the most current, accurate information. So LLMs have some shortcomings that Elastic addresses when building applications that make use of generative AI. So for instance, it may not be able to provide insights. LLMs may not be able to provide insights into your organization's proprietary software or internal documentation. So our ability to bring private or proprietary data to these LLMs at runtime is really critical for a lot of the AI use cases, giving LLM knowledge about more domain-specific things. So rather than making search obsolete, I feel pretty strongly that LLMs like ChatGPT are actually going to become more powerful with the help of search technologies, like Elastic and others. So we're talking about combining what offers the best of both worlds, I think. That deep, that broad knowledge that LLMs have, along with that greater context and refining data of using your personal and proprietary data. And this, of course, can be accomplished by connecting things like ChatGPT to a search engine like Elasticsearch.
As someone who works in search and has dealt with the intersection of AI and search, what stuck out to you the most from the executive order with respect to the important AI issues in the context of search?
Yeah, the EO was relatively quiet on search specific. I would say, generally speaking, the EO went a long way at covering a lot of different areas. I mean, this is the longest EO in history at 111 pages. I think it sort of hit the mountaintops of policy concerns, but did not really dive into anything search specific. Now, of course, there are a lot of areas that we'll feel ramifications of, but did not really address search specifically within the EO.
Since ChatGPT came out about a year ago, many have detailed the national security risks associated with that technology and other AI technologies. I'm sure you've considered these risks and how to alleviate them in your role for Elastic. How does the executive order address the national security dangers you see as most pressing?
Yeah, so national security risks were such a big significant part of the EO, considering the advancement of the large language models like ChatGPT-4. I think the EO really takes kind of a holistic approach to it, to cybersecurity in particular. It's not just about protecting the critical infrastructure from AI-related risk. It's also about trying to find ways to leverage AI to bolster cyber defenses. I would note that late last week, CISA released its roadmap for AI. It outlines some of their efforts to promote those beneficial uses of AI to enhance cybersecurity capabilities, ways to protect the nation's AI systems from those cyber threats, and to deter malicious actors' use of AI capabilities to threaten that critical infrastructure. And just a side note on that, I think personally that AI is probably going to tip cybersecurity maybe in favor of the defender, or at least level out that playing field. There are other specific risks posed by, as you pointed out, national security risks posed by technologies like ChatGPT-4. One of the biggest concerns, and it's throughout the EO, and it certainly takes a lot of headlines, is around synthetic content. So think deep fakes, which can be used for a number of things, but to spread information, create those sort of false narratives that a lot of folks are concerned with. You're really only bound by your imagination to think about what kind of mischief an adversary could inflict with this. So, I think the EO sets a marker. It directs, I believe, the Commerce Department to begin to develop ways to authenticate, to track, and to label this kind of synthetic content. And again, this goes back to trying to maintain that public trust in AI. Another significant risk that the EO takes on is the potential use of AI in developing chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear threats, or CBRN. If you think about it, this really lowers the barrier of entry for people malicious actors to get into this. It can accelerate the research and development of CBRN materials. It can be used to improve delivery mechanisms, for instance. Overall, AI is going to really lower the barrier so that those less sophisticated actors can potentially develop these types of weapons. So, once that was solely the province of, say, your state-run lab, can now have non-state actors trying for it. So the EO responds to this by tasking some key departments to evaluate and report on AI's capabilities in this area, aiming to both understand and mitigate these threats. This is really putting a flag in the ground and maybe trying to find out some more information later, as far as I can tell. I think lastly, the EO calls for the development of the National Security Memorandum to govern AI used on national security systems. So this will include directing specific AI assurance, risk management practices in the areas that would affect U.S. persons. So we come back to balance here. I think the balance is critical. There's huge benefits of AI in fields like cybersecurity, but it's also important for us to be aware of mitigate possible threats they pose. So I think the EO was pretty good about balancing those two pieces.
That's a really helpful overview. Thanks. The order directs AI researchers across different firms to work collaboratively with one another, and also the firms to work with government agencies. I know you've had many discussions in your role with Elastic and in your previous roles in this space with leaders at other firms and in government about the role of AI in your industry. How do you view the nature of collaboration in the AI context within the private sector and between the private sector and U.S. government?
Yeah. So, I've been doing this for quite a while. I think the role of private sector and public-private partnerships is absolutely crucial. I have a couple of thoughts on this section of the EO. First off, it's obvious, but private sector is really at the forefront of AI innovation. They're the ones developing the new technologies, the new use cases. So their expertise is really going to be invaluable in trying to shape effective and practical AI policies. And as we've seen other technology policy issues, particularly around cybersecurity, there's no government out there, there's no industry player out there that's really going to be able to go it alone. It's going to take the whole of society approach here. So these government policies definitely need to be informed by the private sector, and I think the EO gives a good nod to that. So, are government agencies receptive to this input? I'd say absolutely. They actively seek out that input. And I can tell you as a member of the technology community, they're very open to it. I mentioned cyber a bit earlier. When I first started in technology public policy, I was working on Capitol Hill in the Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee. That first cyber bill came through our committee. At that time, important cyber threat data was really mostly siloed between government agencies and definitely between government and industry. And if you go back even further, I think information was siloed and plagued law enforcement community and intelligence community when we were looking at counterterrorism. So, I think over the last 20 years, not only have we broken down a lot of those silos, but the government's been very active in pulling in industry. But, back to AI, it's rapidly evolving. Government agencies often don't have the same level of resource or expertise as industry. And, I don't think that's a controversial statement. This is why agencies frequently seek our insights and in collaboration with industry leaders. It's become kind of a symbiotic relationship where the government provides those guidelines and frameworks, and industry offers the innovation, and kind of keeping people up to date on the sort of the state of the art.
In your experience, which agencies seem to be most saliently involved in developing AI policy and working on AI issues in the U.S. government?
Typically, it'll include agencies like Department of Commerce. Certainly, NIST is heavily involved with technology and trade issues. Since this has primarily been led by the administration, so the Office of Science and Technology and Policy is going to play a key role in shaping national AI strategy going forward. And these public-private partnerships are really about leveraging each other's strengths, so we can all have trust in AI. Make sure that it's ethical, make sure that it's safe and responsible, while still innovating quickly.
One of the ways in which artificial intelligence is so different from other technologies is the scale of advantage that progress in AI can give companies and countries that other technologies cannot. Do you think this capability of artificial intelligence to accelerate progress could undermine the type of collaboration that firms and countries have been able to achieve in other technological sectors?
Yeah. So, Matt, I see your point, and I do think that I know that AI is truly a revolutionary technology. But I would temper that with the fact that I think there is room for a lot of players in the industry space. So far we're probably hearing just from the big AI companies that are the usual suspects. But I would say a lot of the innovation, in fact, is coming from a lot of different places, including a lot of small, medium-sized companies. I would put Elastic in that field. I do think that in a global scope, it is a race around AI, and we're in a competitive geopolitical environment. But I also, like I said, I also think that there's room for a lot of different players. I think that's one reason that the EO came out so quickly, and it really did come out quickly. It came out within a year of ChatGPT and GAI kind of coming onto the scene. I think that really shows the importance of it to the administration, and knowing that we have to plant a flag and try to lead in the policy development, or we will be stuck to follow in the future.
The Biden administration says in the EO that to combat harmful effects of limited competition in the AI space, it will be necessary to give smaller companies access to technical support and resources. What do you think that assistance might look like?
Yeah, I think that was a fantastic part of the EO, and one that, frankly, I was not expecting. If you dig into the EO, it's a multifaceted plan. It involves agencies developing AI policies to tackle risks. It's really about trying to level that playing field and ensure that the AI market remains open and competitive. When it is open and competitive, we get the best technologies moving to the front, no matter where those are developed. Just a couple things that the EO does. It tasks the Small Business Administration with a couple of key responsibilities. It allocates funding for what's called the Regional Innovation Cluster Program, the RIC program. It's all about supporting small business and AI innovation, and then helping those companies commercialize. We're talking about helping with planning, resources. This is a really big deal for the smaller players trying to break into the market. In addition, I think there's about $2 million in what's called growth accelerator funds competition. It's earmarked for accelerators that assist in expanding AI-related curriculum, AI training, technical assistance. This means direct support for small businesses, not only to adopt AI, but to integrate it effectively into their operations and their products. Now, here's one critique I think I have of the EO. Like with so many things in government, it's really going to come down to execution. There are no specific deadlines associated with this part of the plan, which raises a few questions about how quickly and effectively they can be implemented. The success of this part of the EO, really hinges on SBA and other agencies' ability to roll these programs out in the manner intended. But I think the overall thrust of this section of the EO is the right way to go.
Let's talk about some of those deadline type components of the regulatory framework envisioned by the EO. As the government face of Elastic, do you generally advocate for performance-based regulations, which focus on whether companies achieve certain outcomes, or management-based regulations, which require certain processes to be in place, but are less focused on outcomes? Or does it depend on the context?
Yeah, so another great question here. Kind of gets to the heart of what I do as a government affairs person, and like any good lawyer would tell you, it depends. So whether it's performance based or managed based regulation, it's really not about a one size fits all answer. It really depends on a variety of factors. I'd say first and foremost, it depends on what industry we're talking about. Different sectors have different needs. Now, again, I'm going to go back to cybersecurity regulations as an example. You can't treat, say, the financial sector in the same way that you're treating the water sector from a regulatory standpoint. Financial sector is very sophisticated. It's well resourced. You've got the water sector, traditionally less technically savvy and under resourced. Tech companies, for example, generally speaking, we often thrive under performance-based regulations, and those allow for more innovation. They allow for more flexibility. I would say, generally speaking, as a country, we tend to skew more towards performance-based regulations, and we try to leave those details, to the organization. I would say that, as a lobbyist, we need to sort of stay adaptable. We need to understand kind of the unique needs of the industry that we're representing, and keeping in mind kind of those broader societal contexts as well.
How do you view the EO balancing performance and management-based regulations? Do you think it has some of each, or it's more weighted toward one?
I think it leaves a lot of future directives kind of on the table, asks agencies to say, produce recommendations, produce a process. Overall, it does, strike a relative balance, I'd say. On the performance management side of the ledger, it has a strong emphasis on safety, on security, on ethics. The administration plants a few flags that they want industry producing, AI systems that they're not just smarter, but they're also reliable. They're also ethical. They set these kind of end goals and outcomes, but don't really focus on the means or inputs on how to get there. So throughout the order, a big push for innovation, particularly on AI, how AI can bolster our cyber defenses. Then I guess on the management-based aspects of the EO, there are directives for creating guidelines and best practices to ensure that AI is developed ethically. We're talking about protecting privacy, advancing civil rights, and even adjusting our workforce to maybe thrive in an AI-driven economy.
One issue I'm sure you deal with a lot in the search context is transparency. What steps does the EO take to provide users with transparency about AI-generated content? And in light of what you've seen in the search context, do you view those steps as being productive?
Yeah. So lots of buzz around this one. The executive order really zeroes in on this, transparency of AI generated content. The EO takes the approach about getting smarter technology in place. So the EO pushes for advancements in technology that can identify, that can authenticate, that can trace that content that's being churned out by AI systems. Could be a game changer because it's going to help us tell apart what's being created by AI and what's being made by humans. I think this is an area in technology that we're going to see a lot of innovation in here over the next year. Another area, the Department of Commerce has some tasks assigned to it. They've been asked to do a deep dive. Has to be done within, I think, 8 months. Really studying the tools and methods that are out there today that can detect AI-generated content. They're not just looking at how to spot the content, but then also how to track it, where it came from, which is just as important. How to stop AI from being misused, especially in very sensitive areas, like we're seeing in some of the headlines now around child sexual abuse material. I think once they've gathered this material, they've got another, say, 6 months then to come up with pretty solid guidance on how to authenticate digital content and how to spot the synthetic content. And finally, OMB will take this guidance and pass it along to federal agencies, where they will put out their own guidance. I would say that I think the administration did the best that they could for this part of the EO. There's just too much out there we don't know. It's an area of technology that it is probably advancing by the day. So this is one of those sections of the EO that I think they were really more about planting a flag, indicating their interest around this area. And I think this is also another part of the EO that you're going to see a lot of public-private partnership as industry goes in there with potential solutions around identifying synthetic or AI-generated content.
How do you view the EO striking the balance of allowing U.S. companies to surge forward and be the leaders in global AI development that the Biden administration wants them to be, while also sufficiently regulating them to ensure safety and transparency and similar values?
Yeah, I would say, overall, Matt, I would say this is a fairly soft touch executive order, meaning that you're right. They went into this saying, okay, we are in a global competition for AI. And I think governments all around the world are probably grappling with the exact same issue. So how do we take advantage of the very obvious promise that AI holds? How do we mitigate those, what are even more obvious, potential perils associated with AI? I would say that overall, the EO takes a pretty light-handed touch. Again, a lot of tasks for government agencies to review and potentially promulgate their own orders down the road. So I reserve the right to come back on Lawfare and tell you whether or not they took a too aggressive of an approach or not. But no, I would say much of industry's reaction to the EO is, okay, we understand the administration's general concerns, but there are not a lot of teeth with regard to regulation. So I think they feel open to get out there and innovate best they can, while keeping in mind some of the administration's pretty clear priorities outlined in the EO.
How does the AI regulatory environment in the U.S., including this new guidance in the EO, affect Elastic's work differently from how other regulatory environments abroad shape the work of foreign peer firms?
In the U.S., we're seeing kind of a patchwork approach with state level regulations like California's Consumer Privacy Act. But of course, we have no comprehensive federal legislation on the privacy side. This was called for within the EO. So what this does for firms like Elastic, it creates a dynamic and somewhat uncertain regulatory environment for us. So on the other hand, in places like the EU, companies face maybe a more uniform bit of regulations, but they're more stringent. So like GDPR and the proposed Artificial Intelligence Act. What we strive and what we hope for is to have more sort of general harmonization of regulations, whether that's in the U.S. and whether that's globally, so that we aren't having to comply with hundreds of different regulations.
How do you view the consequences of the U.S. approach for a place like Elastic versus the consequences of something like the GDPR for foreign firms?
Yeah, well, Matt, keep in mind, I guess as a threshold matter, many of the leading technology firms in the world are based right here out of the United States. So, and many of the technology firms don't just do business in the United States; they do business globally. So, in many ways, we could be bound to similar regulations coming out of the EU as we are in the United States. So that's why we have such a big push to try to have these regulations, generally speaking, harmonized across the board. But if we're talking just sort of top level here, I would say that just generally speaking, the EU's work around AI is a little more prescriptive. They focus on different levels of risk. But for those things that they deem high risk, they're quite stringent. So, to that degree, I think that it would perhaps slow down European-based firms. They're under a little bit more regulatory potential adherence there. Whereas in the U.S., I don't think that this EO, while it provides a lot of direction, does not have a lot of teeth. So I think it allows for U.S. firms to, innovate maybe a little more quickly.
Let's talk for a minute about the data privacy legislation you've referenced. From your discussions with those on the Hill, what do you view as the most promising avenues for that kind of legislation?
So I don't have great hopes for a national privacy legislation anytime soon. As you know, we have more than 50 statewide privacy pieces of legislation. As far as the Hill goes, I've talked to a lot of staffers. Nobody seems particularly positive about the aspect of a federal data privacy law coming down anytime soon. I hope that changes. I think it would provide everyone with some needed guardrails. But until then, we are looking at a patchwork of 50 different statewide laws. Globally, we of course comply with GDPR and with other privacy acts around the world, and consistently try to push for some harmonization so that we can make our compliance maybe a little easier.
When you're dealing with a patchwork of state laws, what effect does that have on your company? Do they conflict in certain ways? And how might that patchwork status of the law slow down your progress?
Yeah, so great question. I will tell you one thing. It employs a lot of lawyers around the country, helping us ensure that we are compliant. But I think what it really does, Matt, is we pick probably the most stringent of privacy laws across the United States, and we aim for that. And we are just kind of hoping that what we do is sufficient to apply to other states and other regimes. But as you point out, sometimes there's often overlap, but sometimes there is an issue that happens to be unique to one state, and that's when we have to put a lot of extra work in. But otherwise, we are just sort of aiming for that highest common denominator.
You've mentioned that the EO doesn't provide very much search-specific guidance. What are some search-specific directives that you think would be most productive for the federal government to impose on your industry moving forward?
When the EO discusses privacy-enhancing technology, or PETs, so ways to use these large language models while still protecting privacy and safety. I think that I'll just speak for Elastic. I think that Elastic can contribute to this effort by helping with those privacy enhancing technologies, particularly through a product we have called Esri, where you are able to engage with that LLM, use your private, your proprietary information without exposing it to the larger LLM, which has a lot of good privacy and obviously security implications to it. I would like to see the administration maybe dig deeper into some of those potential technology advancements.
Bill, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks so much for joining us on the Lawfare podcast.
Thank you, Matt. Really appreciate it.
The Lawfare podcast is produced in cooperation with the Brookings Institution. You can get ad-free versions of this and other Lawfare podcasts by becoming a Lawfare material supporter through our website, lawfaremedia.org/support. You'll also get access to special events and other content available only to our supporters. Please rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. Look out for our other podcasts, including Rational Security, Chatter, Allies, and The Aftermath, our latest Lawfare Presents podcast series on the government's response to January 6th. Check out our written work at lawfaremedia.org. The podcast is edited by Jen Patja-Howell, and your audio engineer this episode was Noam Osband of Goat Rodeo. Our music is performed by Sophia Yan. As always, thanks for listening.